Hey folks, Mike here. One of my favorite features on a car are the brakes, because what's the point in going if you can't stop? But back in the 60s when this car was made, the brakes aren't quite as reliable as you might expect on a modern car. But we're going to start fixing that today by upgrading the master cylinder. Now, I've never looked at a brake system before. I don't know what I'm doing. This will be my first time and I'm figuring out as we go. But you know, how hard can brakes be? Let's go find out. The first thing I want to do is remove the fuel tank so I can get better access to the brake lines and master cylinder. This is pretty easy to do, and luckily for me, the previous owner said they drained all the fuel out. Just disconnect everything, take out the 4 bolts that hold that fuel tank in, and then pop the fuel tank out. Nice and easy. 1 for 3. 3 without a washer, 1 with a washer. Then the only thing left to remove is the fuel hose. And it is such an awkward angle to get to. Remember how I said the previous owner left the fuel tank empty? Well, this should have been the first sign that that wasn't right. Yet somehow, I still ignored it. Eventually, I got that fuel line fully disconnected the correct way, not by unscrewing the bolt. And it was right around this time that I was gushing fuel all over the floor. So I quickly lifted the fuel tank out, which is pretty easy to do, and now I can see underneath there and have access to all the brake lines. So how empty was the empty fuel tank? Well, that's a 5-litre tub I'm pouring into, so I'd say not very empty at all. That is quite a bit more than I was expecting. Yeah, that guy summed it up pretty well. So with the fuel tank now out, we can start to see things a lot better. That's the master cylinder right there, and that goes through to the brake pedal on the other side. This hose here travels under the fuel tank to the brake fluid reservoir that sits at the front of the car. Then we have this brake line here, which goes all the way to the back of the car and splits out to both the left and right. Here's the brake line to the front left wheel, and one to the front right wheel. And finally, we've got the brake light switch. It detects brake pressure in the master cylinder and turns on the lights at the rear of the car. It's pretty straightforward stuff really, so let's get that master cylinder out. And the first thing we need to do is just disconnect everything from it. That includes the hard lines with the spanner and pulling the wires off the brake light switch. Then, on the inside of the car, there's just a couple of bolts that hold that master cylinder in place. Simply loosen those off and we can pull the master cylinder out.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, it's hard to see, but there's also this little shim that comes. There should be one on each side, so I might have dropped the other one inside, which is not the end of the world. It'll probably just get caught on all the road gunk down there anyway. But I will have to get a new one before I replace it. But on this side, you can just see here, this tube, like this, comes out. And that there just stops the firewall from getting crushed. Like the chassis, the body of the car, getting crushed when you put those bolts in. So make sure when you put it back together, we've got one of these on each side.
The last part to remove are these brake hose retaining clips. And believe me, these are far harder to remove than this 10-second clip makes out. But overall, disassembly is easy. And in fact, this restoration project at home has been referred to as a hobby where I take parts off a car and never put any back on. But it was just before this time that I started procrastinating hard. There are a lot of parts to buy for the brakes upgrade, and I had to get all the details just right. Let's talk about the brakes. Fundamentally, they're pretty straightforward from a mechanical point of view. You put your foot on the brake pedal, that pushes some hydraulic fluid. If it's drum brakes, it will push those pads out and they'll grip onto the drum. If it's a disc brakes, there'll be calipers that grab some rotors, kind of like a bit of a crab, I guess. And whilst they might seem pretty straightforward mechanically, it's super important we get the details right. Because if we don't get the details right, these brakes could fail. And we don't want them to fail because there ain't a lot of safety features on this car. We have got a metal steering wheel, which I'm sure will be quite pleasant in the case of an accident, and we've got a fuel or gas tank sitting right in front of your knees, which might be a little bit explodey. So we really want to get those details right, so these brakes work every time and all the time without issue. And we're also going to have to get this car mechanically certified with an engineering certificate to make sure it's all up to scratch, so everything has to be above board. And there are a lot of things to get right. From matching the parts up, understanding the vehicle standards, to comprehending the standards of the parts I'm buying, and even knowing the Australian specific standards to get this car back on the road. It's all pretty confusing being so new to this, and it took me quite a long time. So what are all these new parts I had to buy? Here's the master cylinder itself, and you can see it here against the original one I've taken off. It's quite a bit longer, and we'll talk about why that is later on. I also had to get a roll of easy bend copper nickel hard brake line, because with that new master cylinder, the brake lines aren't going to attach in exactly the same places. I got a couple of replacement spacers for when we reattach that master cylinder, because as we saw, there was only one when I took it off. And there was also several new tools I needed to do a proper job. A pipe flaring tool to flare the ends of the hard brake lines. This was quite expensive, about $150 off Amazon, but it needs to be precision, so I guess that's okay. These are the hardline bending pliers, just about $25. These are for the finer adjustments to the brake lines. Here's a bending tool for those larger radius bends, and these were around $40. And then there's these larger boxes. And while they are related to the brakes, they're for a future video. So no peeking. I'll have a link to all the parts I've used in the description below. So the first thing I want to do is get the new master cylinder mounted. I think by the looks of things it's going to be pretty straightforward. This all looks pretty well the same size. These holes here are actually tapped, if you can see that. So these bolts will just go straight through, and they'll actually screw into this as we mount it to the car. And the important thing to keep in mind is these spacers, or shims maybe. And so you've got one part of the car is here, that goes in between, and that will go through, and that stops the two sides of the firewall from crushing each other. This will sit in between and make sure they don't squeeze on each other and crush the metal. Alright, let's go get this master cylinder mounted. And installing the master cylinder is just the opposite of taking it out. Push it up through the hole, make sure you put those shims in, and just put the bolts through. This is a surprisingly fiddly job based on the angles. And you're going to need a friend, or in my case a wife, to hold that master cylinder while you drive those bolts in. And now let's understand why I'm bothering to change the master cylinder at all. What we've got here is a top-down view of a Beetle. And if we take that body away, we can take a look inside and see the layout of the brake system. We've got these copper lines here are the hard lines, and the black hoses, that's the rubber hoses going to the wheels themselves and the brakes. If we take a look at the single circuit setup, you can see how this works here. We've got the single circuit master cylinder here, we've got a brake reservoir here, and you can see that we have just one hose connecting down to the master cylinder, and we've got all the hard brake lines coming off the same area. And what that looks like inside the master cylinder is we have a push rod here, which comes from the brake pedal, and a seal here. We then inside there have a spring. And we have the brake fluid coming from the reservoir into here and filling up this area. As the brake pedal is pressed, the push rod is pushed down and it compresses the fluid inside the master cylinder, which means that that fluid then goes out all three of the brake lines, to the left wheel, to the right wheel, and to the back of the car. And so they all work at the same time from one cylinder that was filled up by this one tube here. Now the question is, what happens if there's a leak somewhere? Imagine we have a split in the hose line to the left wheel here. When we compress this fluid down again, this time the fluid will compress, it will take the path of least resistance, which is out of the leak, and we'll lose all our brake fluid there, and there won't be enough pressure in the system to put any pressure through to any of these lines, which means that all of our brakes fail simultaneously, which is not good and not what we want. Now, if we compare that with our dual circuit setup, this time what you'll notice is we've got two lines coming from the reservoir and these two outlets, and our hard brake lines are coming off different areas, some at the front here and some at the back of the master cylinder. And so what this looks like inside is we still have that same push rod, but this time we have a seal here and a seal around about here. And then we have two sets of springs inside. And then our fluid sits in these two chambers separately. One comes down this line from the reservoir and fills this section. And then one comes down this line from the reservoir and fills this section. So what that means is when we compress this now, these two sections compress independently. The green compresses here and goes to the back brakes. The blue compresses here and goes to the front brakes. So with the dual circuit, what happens when we've got a leak in one of our hose pipes? Well, let's imagine we've got a leak in this pipe here again. Now what will happen is, as we compress this, these two parts are independent. So the blue will leak out here, the path of least resistance, and there won't be any brake fluid going to the left wheel or to the right wheel. But the green is unaffected, so the back brakes will continue to work. So we retain braking pressure in at least one of those circuits, and it's better to have some brakes than none at all. So now we know why I'm doing the master cylinder upgrade. We can go ahead and make all the new hard lines. The first thing I do is measure how long I want the brake line to be by putting a bit of stiff wire in the space. And based off that wire, I measure out a length of the copper nickel tube. Then I use a pipe cutter just to cut that pipe off nice and easy. The pipe cutter always leaves a bit of a bird end, so I use a fine file just to clean things up. This is a really important step to get a good flare. Now I stick the bit of pipe into the flaring tool and clamp it down nice and tight so that pipe can't come out. Then I clamp the whole thing in the vise. I pop a small bit of grease on the tip of that DIN bolt tool so it slides into the pipe easily. Then I stick the bolt in, I tighten it up as hard as it can go. Then I can loosen the case again, open it up, and I've got a perfect DIN flare.
There is something so satisfying about doing this.
And then I thread on a couple of tube nuts, one facing the flare I've already done, and one facing the other way ready for the next flare.
And there we go, there's the other one. And that is my first bit of brake line.
Then I just place that bit of brake line in the car and begin the tedious process of bending it into shape. I'd love to pretend here that I got this fitted on the first time, but the truth is different. Shaping these brake lines in tight spaces without kinking them is really hard to do, as is getting a perfect flare. I might have had a few practices of that as well. And then we just rinse and repeat for the left-hand side. And I would love to say that I got this one right first time, but here I am making it again. Luckily, the steel brake line to the rear wasn't too far off, so with a bit of persuasion, I could get that lined up and screwed in. And there we have it, my first ever beautifully routed hard brake lines. And that's probably 10 hours of work condensed into 2 minutes of footage. They are a frustrating and tedious process. And then I had a little friend. But what's that? That's not a cockatoo. Shoo! Shoo! Be gone! Only cockatoos allowed in this garage. And with the local fauna taken care of, let's get on to the last part of the build. The dual circuit master cylinder is also going to need a dual circuit brake reservoir with 2 pipes coming out of it. This one's actually from a 67 Beetle, but is a pretty common option when doing this upgrade. But as you can see though, the original and this one are pretty different sizes. This one's got 2 pipes for the 2 sides of the master cylinder, and the other one has 1 pipe. So what we're going to need to do is modify this, cut some holes in there to get those 2 pipes through, and then also this strap that secures it in place, that's going to need to be modified so it can hold this one, which is a bit longer. I put the washer fluid reservoir back in and lined up the brake fluid reservoir to see where it goes. I made a couple of marks for where those holes need to be drilled. I started off with a small pilot hole, then worked my way up with a step bit to a 14mm hole. I used a small file to remove any burrs and sharp edges. The original strap for the reservoir was about 10mm wide. I couldn't find anything that small at Bunnings, but I did get this, and I'm going to cut it down. And then I took a file to all the sharp edges, just to flatten them off so I wouldn't cut myself, and I rounded off all the corners too. And now I can shape it up. It's just 1mm aluminium, so it's pretty easy to bend, and I used the reservoir as a template to bend around it, and then just finessed those bends. I popped it in the car to measure how long it was, as I deliberately left it oversized. This let me figure out where to fold the corner tabs. I folded the tab on one side, and then the other. Then I did a final test fit, and it was great, which lets me commit to cutting away the old strap that was there. The old strap was welded on, so I had to grind away the original base. Then I drilled some small holes in the tabs of the new strip so I could mount it with bolts, as well as drilling out the corresponding holes in the car. Well, I'd say that looks pretty well factory new. And that ain't going anywhere. So now we've got that brake reservoir installed, the next job is to get it connected up to the master cylinder. What we're going to do is take some hard line off of the bottom of these two outlets here, take it down here, and then we'll connect it onto this with a bit of the soft rubber hose. And you know the drill by now. Measure, cut, bend, check the fitment in the car, adjust, get our step count up, walking backwards and forwards to the bench, bend some more, chop the end down to length, and then copy and paste for the other side. These lines are a bit different in that they connect to the reservoir with a bit of rubber hose. The fluid from the reservoir is just gravity fed. That means there's no real pressure here, so it's totally fine to use rubber hose, as long as it's the right kind that the brake fluid won't degrade. And with those lines fully installed, it's just a matter of connecting the hard lines to the master cylinder via the rubber hose, and then securing the hoses with some hose clamps. I gave the steering a quick turn both ways, just to make sure the damper and tie rod didn't rub against any of those new lines. And the very last job is just to install a brand new brake light switch on the bottom of that master cylinder, not forgetting to reconnect those wires. And there we have it, my first ever master cylinder upgrade and a hard brake line install. I think I did a pretty good job. Let me know in the comments below. So that pretty well completes this master cylinder upgrade. I haven't finished everything. The tube nuts aren't tightened at the front of the car, and I haven't bled the system. And I can't bleed the system yet because there's no brakes. There's no brakes at the back of the car because there's a bit of an issue with the transmission that I'm going to have to look at. And the front of the car, I'm actually going to do a disc brake upgrade. So that'll be in a future video. Stay tuned for that. Overall though, I'm really happy to be actually putting some pieces back on the car, and I'm excited that we've got an upgraded brake system that's going to be more reliable. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Everything's covered in fuel. There's that hose pipe. There's some creepy crawlies that are all dead in here.